Hi, I'm Donna Cutile from Scenic Roots, and I'm your host for Flowers, Veggies, and Other Things. Today I am bringing in Russell Norton for you, who is an educator for the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension. This time of year, it's very important that we talk about the winter moth, because I'm sure you're very curious about what's going on with all those little light brown moths. So I'm going to bring him in to talk to us about the winter moth, their life cycle, and what we can do to control them. So we'll head off and talk to him now. Thanks. We're here with Russell Norton from the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, and I brought him in here today to talk to you about the winter moth. Now, this is a season right now in the winter where you're seeing all the light brown moths fly around your lights and your outdoor patios within your headlights. Then you are going to see them hatch in the springtime, and they're going to come about and eat up all your trees and shrubs, the little inchworm caterpillars that you see. So it's very important that we brought Russell in here today to tell you what you could possibly do now, or not do anything right now and wait until the spring months. So thank you for coming in, Russell.
No problem. It's great to be here.
Thank you. He is from the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension. Now, he's an educator there, and I know parts of what his job is, but for you, you might not exactly know what he does and the programs that they provide for us. So I brought him in here first to tell you about what he does. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about what your programs are.
So as a horticultural extension educator with the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, I do programs for both the green industry, so farmers, landscapers, anyone that's looking for horticulture information, I provide it to them. Also the general public, so I do programming and educational classes, usually held at various locations on Cape Cod. Things like how to put your garden to bed in the fall, vegetable gardening in the spring. There'll be some pruning classes coming up this spring. And I also do some other stuff at the Master Gardener course, so I work a lot with the Master Gardeners to educate them so that they can further the outreach of the extension to the rest of the general public. And that's generally what I do. A lot of pest management and helping people deal with those issues and identify them correctly. Because the best way to manage something is knowing what it is. If you don't know what it is, it's really hard to manage. So we do a lot of diagnostic services.
The Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and your education services, are these also free to the groups?
Yeah,
Say like the garden club wants to have you come in and do a presentation for their members.
So in some situations it is. So sometimes we do charge small fees, so we can get a little bit of money back. We also offer a lot of our services out of our office, which is at the Barnstable County Complex in downtown Barnstable. We're in the basement of the Deeds and Probate building, and we have a Master Gardener horticultural clinic there, so homeowners are free to bring in whether it's a plant that they want ID'd, or a disease on a plant that they want ID'd, an insect ID'd. We also do a little bit of soil sampling there too, so we can do pH readings for soil samples that you bring in. And for the industry professionals, I'm also in that office, and I work with those samples that are brought in.
Okay. What's next spring 2013? You have what's some of your programming coming up?
So we're going to be doing a couple things. I'll be doing some pruning workshops, probably all around the Cape, both for fruit trees and ornamentals. So I'm going to try to do a couple. Also going to do some vegetable gardening courses throughout the Cape.
And these will all be listed on your website?
They will be listed on the website. So our website is www.capecodextension.org, and feel free to check that out. We have a lot of fact sheets, a lot of information on that website, and you'd want to kind of go towards the horticulture links in there, because we do offer other services in other areas.
So the horticultural links are more easier for the homeowner and the novice gardeners.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll say.
All right. Now let's get to the nastiness of the winter moth, because we are all seeing the winter moth late November, beginning mid-October, beginning mid-December, depending on the weather here and how they've hatched and are now flying around in the air. Tell me what's going on with them right now.
So what we have here is the winter moth, and on the on this side here, the one with the full wings, that's the male, and that's the one that we generally see crowding around lights on the roads and everything. And then here on the other side, This one is the female, and it doesn't really have wings. It has really, really small, tiny wings that I don't know if you can make them out or not. But it doesn't fly, so it just crawls. And it exudes a pheromone when it's on trees that attract large flocks of males so that they can mate. Generally, at this time of year, we're seeing both males and females, and they're hatching out of the ground. And it's usually around Thanksgiving time and through December that we see them. We'll usually see them on moist evenings that are relatively warm. So you won't see them on really cold nights, but you'll see them on the warmer evenings and during that time of year. And at that time of year, they're coming out and they're mating and laying eggs on trees. And as you said, in the spring, those eggs hatch into an inchworm or a looper and then cause significant damage to a lot of our deciduous trees here.
Right. Now, the winter moth is the small light brown moth that you see flying around in your headlights and your patio porch lights, any type of light. The males are drawn to that light. Those are the ones that you see flying around now. In the spring, they hatch into the small green inchworm. So I want you to be able to correlate what they both are at their two different stages in life. When people say winter moth, they just think it's the moth flying around, and then come spring they get this inchworm and they're like, I have this green inchworm that's attacking my trees and shrubs. What the heck is that?
Right.
And when we tell them winter moth, they're like, no, those were in November and December. They can't be the same thing.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions about, especially at this time of year when people are seeing a lot of those moths, is there a way to control them at this time of year? And there's not. They aren't actually doing any feeding at this time of year.
Yep.
They're literally just mating and laying those eggs. There are some materials out there that you might see, such as the tree bands, which are covered with a sticky substance on the outside. It's usually a plastic or a paper ring. And some people will put those on trees. And the interesting thing is that the males have wings, and that's generally what we see, but the females have very small wings and are unable to fly. So the females actually crawl up and down trees and all over shrubs and everything like that. And they try to, basically, when the females crawl up the trees, they get stuck on that sticky substance.
Right.
It's not...
Which sounds like it would work.
Yeah, and probably in really low populations there would be some efficacy there. But in the populations that we see here, there's just too many. And what would happen is there'll be so many females, they'll actually cover up that sticky area, and then they just create a bridge for the other ones to walk right over it. Also, they found with some research is that when the females came to that sticky thing, they ended up laying their eggs right below it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't generally recommend that, but if you have a couple ornamentals in your yard and you have a very low population,
Give it a try.
It's something.
Yeah.
I'm not going to guarantee you any kind of results from it.
All right. So the spring is really the time to control the winter moths. So what are we looking for in the spring, and how do we control them in the spring?
Okay, so I'm going to kind of go right back to this time of year again. So they're laying their eggs, and they lay these eggs in crevices and under lichens on the base of trees, shrubs, and all woody plant tissues and deciduous plant tissues all over the plants. And when they lay those eggs, generally they're a dark color, a dark green. About a month after they're laid, they turn bright pink, so you can actually go out probably in January and February and find the eggs, or find masses of the eggs. As spring becomes closer and closer, they tend to turn again to a greenish, bluish, and almost black color. And that's right before the eggs actually hatch. This is usually, and it can depend because weather depends, as we know this last spring was really warm, so things were kind of pushed up. But it's sometime towards the end of March to the middle of April. And we generally monitor it by growing degree days, and it's 20 to 50 growing degree days of when they generally hatch. If you were looking for that information, you could go to our website on the horticultural page. You will find the current growing degree days for Barnstable, so where the weather station is.
And so we're saying generally the winter moth are between 20 and
50
growing degree days.
Is when they're hatching.
So that's something else to monitor. Going on their website. Also, just asking your garden centers or calling the extension service too, maybe, finding out where we are in the degrees of the days.
Right. And those, we don't start calculating them till January 1st. So if you looked at it now, it would be 3,000 something. So we don't really start calculating those till the beginning of the year. But as soon as March starts coming around and you're doing your own control on your own property, that might be a good resource to kind of see where things are at. But also that change in the color of the egg is a really good indicator of when they're going to hatch.
Yeah. So when they go from reddish pink,
pinkish orange, reddish pink, somewhere along those lines, to a darker color, kind of a bluish green, and then they get really dark right before they're about to hatch out.
Okay. During the spring-winter moth stage, as the eggs are starting to hatch after they've turned color, what's the process of controlling them?
So it somewhat depends on what crops you're growing, or trees or shrubs or ornamentals. If you're a blueberry grower or an apple tree grower, there's a very large concern because the way these inchworms work, which are very tiny when they first hatch, is they crawl up the trees or they balloon. They have a mechanism where they have a strand, and they can get caught in air breezes and travel to all kinds of places. Another reason why those tree bands don't necessarily work is they can be used in the spring as well to get caterpillars that are crawling up the tree, but since they have this ballooning mechanism, they easily surpass that.
Right.
But on apples and blueberries, they wriggle into the buds, both foliar buds and flower buds. And when they do that, once they're inside, they actually don't chew through the bud, they wiggle in between the bud scales. And once they're in there, they start feeding. And on apple trees and blueberries, they eat all the flowers before the buds open up. And so
this is important.
This is important because flowers lead to fruit. So if you're interested in having blueberries and having apples, and you have a winter moth problem, if they get into those buds, they'll do the damage and you won't get flowers. And so therefore you won't get fruit. So it's a really major issue for commercial growers, but also for even the homeowner who has a couple blueberry bushes or a couple apple trees that they'd like to see some fruit from. And most of us do.
And most of us do. What can we do about it?
So for those people that are growing apples and blueberries, the first treatment is usually a dormant oil spray applied just before hatch or right around hatch.
Okay.
So that would generally be in March sometime. What dormant oils do is they smother the eggs and kind of suffocate the insect inside the egg. So you don't want them to be hatched out at the time of your dormant oil spray. So generally we do it right before bud swell. It's a very hard thing to figure out, but we talked about the changing in the color of the eggs. So when you see that, that might be a good time to put on a horticultural oil spray or dormant oil spray.
Now the horticultural oil is not good to use after they've hatched because they're too big.
Correct.
To actually get smothered by the oil.
Yeah, and the way that the moth lays the eggs, you're not going to get 100% killing of the eggs either, because they tend to hide the eggs under bark scales and in lichens and things like that, and you just won't get a 100% kill on the eggs. So there's usually further treatments down the road that you have to do. It's really important that when you're applying dormant oil that the temperature be above 45 degrees, and also that you don't have a freeze within a couple days. Well, not a couple days, 24 to 48 hours, because those generally increase your chances of phytotoxicity or damage to the parts of the plant from the oil spray.
Okay.
So that's pretty important to take notice of.
Which March could be pretty tricky here on Cape Cod with our constant
so you
freezes.
could, you don't want to put a dormant oil on a cloudy gray day, especially if after that cloudy gray day you're going to have a freeze, because that will increase your chances of damage. The longer that the oil stays on and doesn't dry out, the more likely it is to have that kind of damage.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense.
So after the oil sprays, you have a couple options. So the first thing you're after is getting the inchworms after they hatch, but before they get into those buds. So that's another key time of making an application. So there are a lot of materials available for that. Spinosad materials, which is a chemical derived from a bacterium, is one option, and that's usually the most common homeowner option. It's also used very heavily by commercial people as well. Then you also have your organophosphates, carbamates, and pyrethroids. We generally don't suggest those as much because they're a little bit more toxic to beneficial insects. So we really try to go for the spinosad type materials. BT is another option, Bacillus thuringiensis. This is another bacterium that actually is ingested and then kills the insect as it multiplies inside. And that's the efficacy of BT on winter moth is really not all that great unless you get them when they're really small. As they get a little bit larger later in the season, the efficacy of that material really drops down.
So I just want to point out real quick that even in my mind, this is all sounding very complicated to some of us about the timing of when to get these winter moths. I just want to remind you that going to your local garden centers or contacting the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and logging into their website also, we're going to give you the exact timing of when to take care of these winter moths. It may sound complicated right now. Apply horticultural oil here, apply BT or spinosad here at this time, but only when it's these temperatures. We have all that information for you, your garden centers and Russell at the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension. All that's there for you on the websites, and if you would just give them a phone call, if you're confused about any of the timing on any of this, just give them a call. I mean, that's what we're there for.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. We're there to provide that information. So we talked about those kind of early sprays, the oils, and then getting them. The hard part of controlling these insects is once they wriggle into those buds, is you can't contact them with any
they're under
insecticide.
protective
they're
petals
protected.
of the flowers and the leaf buds.
Right. So if they get in there, they can cause some damage. So you want to control them right before they get in there. But also, if that period of time where the buds stay in a swollen phase, so say, we have a pretty normal spring, the buds are starting to swell, and then we go into a long cold snap, the buds will stay in that kind of swollen phase.
Yeah.
And that allows for much more damage to happen. So the best thing is for the buds to blow out kind of real fast and go into a leafed out. So, because once they're leafed out,
We can get them.
we can get them again.
Okay.
So then they're on the surface of the leaves and in the buds, and we can then go again with those same materials, spinosads,
BT.
carbamates, organophosphates.
So the
pyrethroids.
main reason for the buds staying swollen is just longer periods of cooler temperatures.
Yeah, so
So it's not forcing the leaf or the flower to open.
right. That's generally, and that's year to year it's different. So depending on the weather that we have in the spring, if we have a really early warm up and then it cools down,
Yeah.
the likelihood of the buds staying swollen and not opening up is higher.
So
Yeah.
personally, not only are we wishing for a warm, extended spring, we also want that for caterpillar control.
Yeah, a little bit. It just it would definitely reduce the damage that they can cause in the bud. And when they get into that bud, the feeding that they do basically causes the bud to die. And so when you're at that point, the tree has to go and put out a second flush of growth almost. And that's a lot of stress on a tree.
Okay.
So,
if we get them at the egg stage
yep.
in March, early April, possibly when the eggs change color,
Yep.
with the horticultural oil. It's not 100% guaranteed that we'll get all the eggs.
Correct.
Then the eggs hatch into caterpillar stage before they go into the buds.
Yeah, so kind of right at hatching.
Yep.
So this is the critical 20 to 50 growing degree days.
We have more of a chance.
We have another chance where you'd be going with some of those other materials, not horticultural oil.
Then those that we don't get and they do enter into the bud stage, we have to wait for the rest of the buds and flowers to open to then attack those guys.
Yeah, so generally when you get into that situation, people are putting on repeated applications because a lot of these are materials that need to be ingested. So as the foliage is rapidly expanding, what you sprayed 2 days ago might only be on the tip of a leaf and the rest of the leaf has no material on it.
And I'll say, I think this is the stage where most of the homeowners notice the winter moths.
Right.
When they start to see their leaves starting to get defoliated, their shrubs defoliated, all these holes, and then, the ballooning process, that they're swinging from tree to tree, and you start seeing them hanging down from your trees, that's when we notice the most. So we've already missed 2 times that we could actually have applied something to control the winter moth. So this is the point where they may already be in heavy excess in people's yards because they didn't see them before that.
And for ornamentals, that's okay. So you'll still be controlling them, but if you had apples or blueberries, you would have lost your crop already. But for other things that we don't need the fruit from, it's less important to control them at those early stages.
Now these ornamentals also, they will be defoliated, and there is the possibility that they'll leaf out again during the season. And I believe it takes, is it like the defoliation of a tree or shrub usually takes several years of it happening over and over again before you finally lose.
Yeah,
is that true?
So a defoliation of a tree is a huge stress on trees, and if you actually get in a situation where it is defoliation, it has to come out with a second flush. You have to make sure that that second flush has plenty of water. So you combine a defoliation with some other type of stress, such as a drought stress, and it could lead to a little bit more rapid of a decline. Also, that would also include any other pests. So if you had another pest issue you'd want to keep that under control, because then you have
constant defoliation,
combined stresses that would further push it down a road of decline. We generally consider for most trees, they can handle 3 to 4 years of slight defoliation. So not a complete defoliation, but a little bit of defoliation will only lead to some dieback. So you'll have some limb loss and some crown thinning on your trees.
Okay.
If you have 3 to 4 years of complete defoliation, that's likely a situation where mortality is going to be there. It's probably going to happen. So it could lead to the death of the tree.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
That's good to know, because usually a season will go by and someone say, oh no, ornamental maple, Japanese maple will get defoliated by the winter moth.
Yeah.
The customer or the homeowner, they won't really notice, so they'll be like, okay, I'll get them next year. And then the following year they'll do a little preventative spraying, and then all of a sudden the tree starts dying over the years, and they're wondering why.
Right.
And
We'll start seeing some
from the
decline.
cause of the defoliation.
So we usually see things several years after they actually happened in trees. So that would be a pretty typical situation for a homeowner. They have a tree, it got defoliated. The next year they decided to control it a little bit, and they did a good job. But the next year they start to see some dying back of some of the foliage, and that was likely from the stress that happened of that year of defoliation.
Yeah.
So,
This is a really good tip to pay attention to, because if you have any ornamental trees that you absolutely love in your yard and they're constantly getting defoliated, you're going to lose them in a few years if you don't protect them. So really do pay attention to the winter moth that's defoliating them in the spring, so you can save the money that you spent on these ornamental trees. So now, after the caterpillars have come out of the leaves and the flower buds that have opened up, and you're starting to really see them making Swiss cheese out of your leaves, what's going on now, and what do we do to end their cycle?
So basically what the winter moth is doing, it's come out of the buds and it becomes a free feeder, feeding on all the foliage that's there. This is also the stage that we see, like you said, the most, because they have that ballooning mechanism. So they go in, they defoliate a bud or some leaves, and then they, on a light piece of silk strand, they catch some air currents and go to either a new leaf surface or a new bud. And they'll be in this free feeding stage until the end of May, early June, and they actually only get about 1 inch long, so they're not really big caterpillars. And then at that time, they pupate, they fall to the ground, and they pupate in the soil. So they stay in the soil all the way up until we see them again in Thanksgiving time, so when they're actually coming out of the soil. Unfortunately, we don't have any great controls for them in the soil either as well. So again, it's another area where ideally we would have a control for them at that stage, but we don't. There are things that beetles, some ground beetles that are out there in our landscapes and in the forest that do probably eat, a fair number of them, but just not enough to
Not
control
enough
the
to
insects.
control. So what are we doing? What is the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and other services doing regionally to help control the winter moth?
So, give you a little bit of history about the winter moth. The winter moth is a new invasive species to Cape Cod. It's native to Europe. And in the 1950s, the first outbreak actually occurred in Nova Scotia. And they actually were able to bring in a biological control, so another insect that parasitizes or is a predator, and they got control. In the 1970s, there was a small outbreak on the west coast.
On the west coast?
Yep. And again, they had similar success with biological control. So we actually have a little bit of knowledge of how to control this on a larger scale than, homeowner properties. And Joe Elkington of UMass, who is an entomologist, has been working on releasing a parasite, which is it's a fly, and I think they've been doing releases since 2005. That parasite has established in the landscape, so it's starting to work. And he's going to continue those releases and the rearing of that fly. And it will be likely that that will be the ultimate control, and it will become less and less of an issue over time.
And no, but this is a very slow process because he has to breed these flies in a lab.
Yep.
And then only release small numbers into the
Yeah.
environment, different places, different locations.
Right, so I think they've had several locations, and they increase the number of locations as they've increased their ability to rear this particular fly. They actually go to areas and collect it as well. So they collect the larvae that are infected. So just to tell you how this biological control works, it's a fly. It lays eggs on the leaves when the caterpillars are feeding. Caterpillars ingest the eggs, and then they actually hatch inside the larvae, and that's how it kills the larvae. So that's how it works.
Sounds pretty gross, but it's effective.
Yeah, it is effective. And so they actually go out and sometimes collect the larvae that are infected and bring them here to also get a little bit higher release. So there's on that end, that's great news. It's eventually it will not be the pest that it has been. We have some great fact sheets. So if you go to our www.capecodcooperativeextension.org website, you can find some links to some winter moth fact sheets, which will have covered everything that we discussed here today, and will give you, something better than just trying to remember it from the conversation that we're having right now. And also contacting your local garden center or arboriculturist or anything that who might be able to help you out with the control efforts.
Thank you. Russell just closed the show out for me, so thank you for coming. It was great to talk to you. And like Russell said, remember to just contact Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, go on their website, pick up some fact sheets, call your local garden center if you have any questions about what's going on with the winter moth any time of year, and they'll help you out. Thanks.